Thank you very much, and thanks very much for having Lee and myself this afternoon to give you a bit of an insight into our mattress project. The Metropolitan Waste and Resource Recovery Group is one of 7 waste and resource recovery groups across Victoria. The group is the biggest of the 7 groups, and we assist the 31 councils in Melbourne which produce and manage around about 80% of Victoria's waste. Our main roles is to plan for the infrastructure and services that are required to support what we call waste and the recovery and the treatment of that material. We facilitate a lot of joint collective contracts on behalf of local government, and we support both local government, industry and communities with regards to their community awareness, education and really provide them with hopefully a value-add system that can help them through their needs. As Adam said before, we're the poor cousin with regard to power, water and waste, but realistically, as I said, Melbourne produces around about 80% of Victoria's waste. We've got 4.4 million people in Melbourne, which will double by the middle of the century. With that, we'll go from 10.5 million tonnes of waste that we currently we manage to 16.5 million tonnes. So we've got a fairly significant increase in infrastructure to do more than what we're doing now. And if we did the things the way we're doing it, the material that we send to landfill, which is about 2.8 million tonnes a year, we'll need 2 more substantial landfills if we don't look at recovering waste and removing our reliance on landfill the way that we do things at the moment. So there's lots of things in landfill that is low-hanging fruit, but today we're looking at why mattresses. Mattresses, in 2011, we were told that local government collected through hard waste collections, dumped rubbish, and at transfer stations around about 130,000 mattresses across Melbourne per year. 3 years later, it went up to 230,000 tonnes. And it will grow substantially. I think for every 100,000 people that move into metropolitan Melbourne, about 80,000 mattresses come with them. So really the mattress problem will grow as populations grow. Our recovery rates are only around about the 50% mark, so there's a huge opportunity to recover and recycle more material from that waste stream. And we really need to understand the data, and that's really one of the big things from this piece of work. Also in 2011, DreamSafe, who was the major recycler in Melbourne, went into liquidation, and that left 60,000 mattresses a year without a home. So we really needed to do something, and we had a little funding program where we provided Knox City Council and Waste Management Services some funding to increase the capability of mattress recycling in Melbourne, but it really didn't solve the problem. And we really needed to review what the capacity of industry was to look after the mattress stream into the future and have much better understanding of really the data and the information that we're required to make some decisions. So that's where we formed a relationship with Lee and his company to do a piece of work for us to understand and do a comprehensive piece of work to really look at what was out there both in the commercial areas and local government areas with regard to mattress waste. So the objective of the waste study was really to answer a few questions. How do we increase the recovery? What are the barriers in doing that? And how do we manage the whole system and make it into a sustainable system that we can really understand what costs are going forward, rather than really we had many little players with standing knives and ripping things apart with their hands, and we really needed to lift the bar to some extent. So we also wanted Lee to look at local government mattresses, but also what industry was doing with their mattresses as well, and really look at what are the issues, opportunities and emerging technologies. So I'll leave it there, and Lee can tell you all about what he found out.
Thanks, Rob. Okay, as Rob mentioned, there was some data already available. It was based on a 2011 council survey. Unfortunately, that survey was undertaken probably about a month after the liquidation of DreamSafe, And one of the problems that I discovered in looking at that data, that was 11 of the 30 councils surveyed a month after DreamSafe collapsed still nominated DreamSafe as their recycler. About 131,000 mattresses were identified as being collected. The data said that 91% of them were recycled, inverted commas, recycled. The actual recovery of material was probably quite low, and the data also indicated that only 4.7% of all the mattresses collected were collected by illegal dumping collection programs. That amounted to 6,100 mattresses, although 17 of the 30 councils actually said they had no idea how many illegal mattresses they collected, if they collected any at all. Mornington and Geelong weren't included in the survey. Geelong, of course, is not part of Melbourne, but you can't really excise it from the Melbourne market because Geelong people buy mattresses in Melbourne and Melbourne people buy mattresses in Geelong, and they move from one city to the other. It's really only a short drive along the freeway from one metropolis to the other. And I figured also that many of the figures in the 2011 survey looked like estimates because, for instance, 11 of the 13 figures that were quoted in the illegally dumped numbers ended in 100, and 13 of the 30 recycled figures ended in a figure that ended in 100. So they look to me a little bit like estimates or guesstimates. Anyway, we commenced the next survey, the 2014 survey, and we surveyed this time all 32 metropolitan councils, including Geelong and Mornington Peninsula Council. We also looked at all 54 transfer stations, resource recovery centres and landfills, looking at both the private and the public sector. We also looked at all the commercial mattress collectors and recyclers that I could identify. And probably for the first time we looked at institutional mattress users to try and get a bit of a handle on who was actually generating waste mattresses other than householders. And that included all 17 boarding schools in the Melbourne area, the 9 universities spread across 21 campuses that had residential colleges, the 32 major hospitals. Didn't survey all hotels, motels and service departments, but we looked at ABS data for all of those facilities with greater than 15 rooms to come up with a number of beds, and interviewed some of those to come up with an average number of mattresses per bed, and what the turnaround or the turnover of those mattresses was. We also looked at the 6 ADF residential sites within the Melbourne metro area and the 7 metro correctional facilities, the prisons. And we also interviewed 24 major mattress retailers, and the mattress retailers are responsible for 203 outlets across Melbourne. So the data collection was obviously quite laborious, but that's the only way to get sound data, unfortunately. Somebody asked me after the survey how we'd got hold of the data, and assuming that it was sitting there somewhere and we just grabbed it, and I said, well, it was only about 3,000 phone calls. So we started with initial phone contact, follow up with an email and questionnaire once we had identified the right person. When they didn't send the survey back, which they invariably didn't, we had a follow-up phone call, follow-up email, follow-up phone call, follow-up phone call, follow-up phone call. And it's quite satisfying when you're up to about the 8th phone call to get the highlighter on the Excel spreadsheet and put a yellow highlight through one that you'd actually got the data from, until eventually the whole spreadsheet was coloured in yellow. So it was laborious, but it was satisfying because we ended up achieving our goal of getting all the data we wanted. Mattresses that are collected in council collections, however they're collected, by the time they're delivered to wherever they're delivered, this is pretty much what they look like, because most mattresses are picked up in hard waste collections. This would be no surprise to you. The key findings of the council mattress collection survey were that there were 232,418 mattresses either collected or received by those 30 councils. For whatever its value, that gave us a figure of 55 waste mattresses per 1,000 residents, and we did a bit of comparison to see how much that changed across councils. We also found there were 19,367 stated as being collected from illegal dumpings, which gave us a figure of 8.3% of all the mattresses reported. Remember back, that was 4.6% in 2011. So the figure itself was actually roughly 3 times the number that was reported in 2011. Once again, for whatever its value, that gave us a stat of 4.6 illegally dumped mattresses per 1,000 residents. But the spread was quite big, so I don't know if you can really look at your council and say, I've got 70,000 residents times 4.6 per 1,000, that's how many illegally dumped you're going to get. I'm not sure that you can do that. Okay, so the 3 ways that mattresses arrive into council's hands, either through a collection service or being dropped off at a council facility or picked up by council staff as illegally dumped. And there are 2 ways that councils collect them, either through a scheduled collection service or through an on-call collection service. And you can see from those percentages that it's about a third each for the 2 types of collection services, with and about a quarter are actually dropped off by residents at a facility. Took the opportunity when we were interviewing the council officers to ask them what their perceptions of illegal dumping were. I think that a lot of these men and women have actually got a pretty good feel, particularly if they've been in that council for a little while. They've got a pretty good feel for whether it's getting worse or getting better, whether they're actually making a difference. You can see the responses there in that pie chart. Probably the most interesting stat is that only 9% of those officers interviewed really believe that it's decreasing, that the number is actually decreasing. So of all the things that are being done to combat illegal dumping of mattresses, only 9% of the officers in 30 councils felt that it was really having such an effect that the figures were decreasing. In the case of each council, wherever they sent their mattresses to for reprocessing, we looked at that methodology, and also the other areas that we did interviews, we asked them about their methodology. The vast majority of mattresses in Melbourne at the time of the survey are processed via just mechanical shredding. That's pretty much just one facility, so it's the Knox transfer station. So many mattresses go to that transfer station, eventually through either drop-off or council collections. That's by far and away the largest recycling technology that's used. Manual dismantling, which you'd no doubt have an idea what that involves, cutting it up by hand and pulling out the materials by hand. That accounts for the next largest amount, 29%. Combination of manual dismantling and then shredding the rest. Most of that 7% was mattress gator, which is another big mattress reprocessor, which is now owned by the Tick Group. Loader ripping, in case you're unaware what loader ripping is, that's what some landfill and transfer stations use to get the steel out of the mattress, rip it apart by a couple of loaders, maybe even leave the mattress out to rot for a little while before they rip it apart. So it's a way of volume reduction before you landfill and getting some value out of the material. But I don't know that I'd really call it a recycling technique, but it's not just straight landfilling, so in this instance we did call it a recycling technique. As I said, surveyed all the landfills, transfer stations and resource recovery centres. There's Wyndham on the left and Whitehouse transfer station on the right. There were 48 facilities that we surveyed. That accounted for a bit over 162,000 mattresses. Some of these are double counted because a lot of those facilities are operated by councils, so the numbers are included in the council numbers. 59% were received at one facility, obviously the Knox transfer station. And almost 6,000 mattresses received at the non-council facilities. So there are lots of little transfer stations and mostly they try to avoid receiving mattresses. So I guess that's why that number was so low. Interestingly, the landfill gate price, you would think that getting it to the end of the pipe would end up being cheaper, but landfills don't really want mattresses, so they generally try and price them away from the gate. So that was a bit over $31, and the average of the other facilities was $22.56. So quite a disparity between the pricing strategies by those two different types of facility. Looked at all of the commercial collectors and reprocessors that would talk to us, which is most of them. That's some of the work going on at the Knox transfer station on the top left. On the top right is a smaller disability organisation that operates manual dismantling at a transfer station, and the one down the bottom is Mattress Gator, as I said, now owned by the TIC Group. Of the commercial collectors and reprocessors, not all of them are undertaking council contracts. Some of them, for whatever reason I don't really understand, had decided to go into this business and just do it as a commercial enterprise. There are perhaps 30 of them. I identified 18 that I could speak to and surveyed those. It accounts for almost 290,000 mattresses, but 5% of those mattresses come from outside of Melbourne. You've got no way of really knowing when a guy does a collection run, how many come from the Melbourne area and how many come from the country area that he services. And 80% of them were sourced from council collections, so people that do processing on behalf of a council. Just some observations about the business characteristics. It's a fairly short-term business. People don't last in this business. They're all trying to make 4 years. Most of them don't make 4 years in the business. Their ability to plan is minimal. They're short of capital. The OH&S that they display is pretty poor. There's a lack of regulation. Profitability is quite low. In fact, it's probably below a profit-making level in many cases. They're a suspicious lot. They believe they've got some IT and don't want to talk about it, so this required lots and lots of phone calls to try and gain their trust and find out what they were really doing. And that whole part of the industry is awash with greenwash. They make all sorts of environmental and social claims to justify what they're doing, but what they're really doing is trying to make money in a business that doesn't make money. As I said, for the first time, I think, we looked at institutional mattress users. 407 institutions accounted for a bit over 70,000 beds. The number of mattresses per annum is determined by how often these facilities turn over their mattresses, turn over and change them, so that the numbers you can see in that column chart are really determined by the turnover frequency. Obviously, hotels are most of the mattresses. Okay. Also looked at retailers. The key stat from this is that the top 9 retailers sell 60% of the mattresses in Melbourne, and in fact, the top 3 account for almost 40%. Mattress recovery, the actual materials recovered, we looked at the processes and estimated how much material is getting recovered and recycled. It's quite a sad story. Only 55% of the materials are actually recovered, we estimate. The key findings you can probably get from this online. Most of those figures I've covered. The key stat, I guess, is Rob said Melbourne population is going to double in the next 40 years, so the problem is only going to get worse. There's a bit of a gap between the estimate of how much is retailed and how much is the theoretical total of what's going into the market. We looked at the US market, the UK and European markets, and there's a few technologies that are of interest there, but that's the technology that the TIC Group is importing into Australia. This is a Welsh technology which is half automated and half manual, and this is a technology being promoted by Innovec, which is developed in Australia using high pressure water to smash up the mattresses. So in closing my little bit, the volume is growing, recovery is limited, there need to be better regulations, better standards of practice. The operators need to understand that if you're not making money out of the materials and the gate fees, you may as well not be in business. There should be some sort of manufacturer responsibility, And at the moment, and perhaps not even at the moment, only steel has market value. The issues pretty much line up with all of those, so I won't go through those in detail either, and I'll just hand back to Rob to talk about where we went from there.
And we'll stop there. The opportunities are up there and you'll see them, but the main opportunity is that specifications for local government need to be lifted so we actually employ the right technology for the right job. So I'll leave that. We're over time, so thank you very much for listening to us. Thank you.